You're listening to Audiology. Support this channel by becoming a member and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. The term Second New Deal refers to the period between 1935 and 1936, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the second phase of his New Deal programs. This phase included significant legislation such as the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act, the Banking Act, and the Social Security Act, among others, aimed at economic and social reform. In a speech to Congress on January 4, 1935, Roosevelt outlined his vision for the nation, focusing on better use of natural resources, protection against the challenges of old age, unemployment and illness, improving housing conditions, and creating jobs through a national work relief program known as the Works Progress Administration. These initiatives sought to redistribute wealth and power to support poor, elderly, farmers, and labor unions. Key elements of this phase were establishing Social Security and reforming banking and labor relations through significant acts. Despite resistance, Roosevelt managed to push through legislation that benefited millions of World War veterans by granting them a bonus, overriding opposition from both Roosevelt himself and others. This move was part of a broader strategy that garnered strong support from liberals, creating a powerful political coalition that included union members, urban political organizations, the southern states, and ethnic minorities. However, conservative opposition, led by groups like the American Liberty League and big businesses, remained strong and eventually hampered further liberal reforms after 1936, with liberals losing control of Congress by 1938. Despite these challenges, many of the New Deal's programs, which had been in planning stages for years, made lasting impacts. They addressed long-standing social issues and laid the groundwork for modern social welfare policies. Influential FIGs and organized groups, including veterans demanding their bonuses, played critical roles in shaping Roosevelt's agenda. While some programs ended with the onset of World War II, foundational reforms like Social Security and the Wagner Act endured, marking the Second New Deal as a pivotal moment in American history. Up until 1935, only 12 states had set up old age insurance, and even these programs didn't have enough funding. Wisconsin was the only state with an insurance program in place. Meanwhile, the United States stood out as the only advanced industrial nation lacking a national Social Security system during the Great Depression. The early New Deal work programs, like Civil Works Administration and Federal Emergency Relief Administration, were temporary fixes meant to help people right away for a year or two. But in 1935, the most critical piece of the New Deal was introduced, the Social Security Act. This act was groundbreaking. It created a lasting system of Social Security for retirees, unemployment insurance, and welfare benefits for disabled individuals and children in single-parent families. Essentially, it laid down the foundation for the welfare system in the United States. President Roosevelt was adamant that this system should be funded by payroll taxes rather than general funds. He argued this point fiercely, saying, "We put those payroll contributions there so as to give the contributors a legal, moral, and political right to collect their pensions and unemployment benefits. With those taxes in there, no damn politician can ever scrap my Social Security program." In 1935, the Wagner Act, or the National Labor Relations Act, marked a significant turning point for American workers by recognizing their right to form unions and collectively bargain. This act also led to the creation of the National Labor Relations Board, which played a crucial role in mediating wage agreements and handling labor disputes. Although it did not force employers to agree with their workers, it opened new doors, leading to a massive increase in labor union membership, particularly in industries like mass production. This was mainly driven by the growth of the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, making labor a key part of the New Deal coalition. However, the competition between these two labor unions did somewhat weaken their collective strength. To address the needs of agricultural workers, the Jones-Costigan Act of 1934 introduced several important protections, including a ban on child labor for those under 14, limits on work hours for children between 14 and 16, minimum wage requirements set by the USDA after public hearings, and mandates for prompt and full payment to workers. This act was succeeded by the 1937 Sugar Act, which continued and strengthened these labor provisions after the Supreme Court ruled its predecessor unconstitutional. 1936 brought the Public Contracts, Walsh-Healy Act, which set labor standards on government contracts like minimum wages, overtime pay, and safety requirements. That same year saw the Anti-Strikebreaker, Burns Act, making it illegal to transport or support the transportation of strikebreakers across state or national borders. The Davis-Bacon Act of 1935 established prevailing wage requirements for certain public work projects, ensuring fair compensation for skilled labor. The Miller Act of 1935 protected construction workers and suppliers by allowing them to sue for unpaid dues. The Motor Carrier Act of 1935 improved safety and work conditions for those in the transportation industry, while the Merchant Marine Act of 1936 did the same for maritime workers. Legislation in 1936 also expanded healthcare services to seamen and included air transportation employees under the Rail Labor Protections. Several laws in 1937 and 1938 further expanded workers' rights and protections. The Bituminous Coal Act of 1937 made it illegal to force workers into company unions, while national programs for railroad retirement and unemployment benefits were introduced. The Randolph-Shepard Act provided employment opportunities for blind individuals through vending stand operations in federal buildings. State workers' compensation laws were extended to federal property by Public Law No. 814. The National Apprenticeship Act set standards for apprenticeship programs, and the Chandler Act of 1938 offered relief to wage earners in debt. Moreover, various acts in 1938 improved conditions for specific groups, such as extending employment opportunities for blind individuals to sell goods to the federal government, regulating work hours for drivers in interstate commerce, and setting an 8-hour workday for certain maritime employees. Legislation also addressed the rights and compensation of air carrier employees following a National Labor Board decision. Finally, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 was a landmark law that capped working hours at 44 per week, set a minimum wage, and put restrictions on child labor, positively impacting the wages and working hours of millions of workers, particularly in the South. In the mid-1930s, the U.S. government took several significant steps to enhance the rights of consumers. One of the measures introduced was the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1935. This law aimed to shield consumers and investors from the detrimental practices of companies involved in gas and electric utilities. It stated its purpose was to protect consumers and investors from abuses by holding companies with interests in gas and electric utilities. Alongside, the Federal Power Act of 1935 was enacted, which focused on safeguarding customers and ensuring the fairness and essentiality of services provided by modern society. It sought to protect customers and to assure reasonableness in the provision of a service essential to life in modern society. Another critical step was the introduction of the Natural Gas Act of 1938. This act was designed to protect consumers from being exploited by natural gas companies, stating its goal was to shield consumers against exploitation at the hands of natural gas companies. In addition to these acts, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 was passed, giving significant authority to the Food and Drug Administration. This act allowed the FDA to test and license drugs and to check the safety of cosmetics, while also giving the Department of Agriculture the power to establish quality standards food. Lastly, the Wheeler-Ley Act reinforced the powers of the Federal Trade Commission, a body with roots in the Progressive Era. This act empowered the Commission to fight against unfair and deceptive business practices, saying it gave the Federal Trade Commission, an old progressive agency, the power to prohibit unfair and deceptive business acts or practices. Together, these laws were foundational in strengthening consumer rights and establishing guidelines that would protect the American consumer from various forms of exploitation and unfair practices, setting a precedent for future regulation. In an effort to combat unemployment, Roosevelt took a significant step by creating the Works Progress Administration, with his good friend Harry Hopkins at the helm. Roosevelt was adamant that the projects of the Works Progress Administration needed to be labor-intensive, offer long-term benefits, and not encroach upon the domain of private businesses. This meant the pay for workers of the Works Progress Administration was on the lower side. The mission of the Works Progress Administration was clear: get Americans back to work by financing construction projects. This initiative led to the creation of hospitals, schools, and countless miles of roads, including over 650,000 miles of highways and numerous public buildings, bridges, and parks, employing over 8.5 million workers along the way. Notable endeavors include the construction of the Lincoln Tunnel, Triborough Bridge, LaGuardia Airport, the Overseas Highway, and the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. Additionally, the Rural Electrification Administration played a pivotal role in energizing rural America, with the assistance of cooperatives, significantly reducing the number of homes without electricity from 90% to 40% for the 1940s. The National Youth Administration, an offshoot of the Works Progress Administration focusing on the youth, saw the future President Lyndon B. Johnson leading its Texas division, setting a precedent for his later Great Society programs. Unique to New York City was Federal One, providing employment for creatives, including writers, musicians, and artists, despite facing scrutiny for communist affiliations by conservatives. The Federal Writers Project left a lasting legacy by employing writers across every state compile a renowned guidebook, document local archives, and capture the folklore and stories of former slaves through interviews. Under the guidance of Hallie Flanagan, the Federal Theater Project brought affordable theater to many, employing a wide range of theater professionals. The Federal Art Project likewise commissioned women artists to beautify new post offices and courthouses with murals and sculptures, many of which can still be admired today. All in all, the Works Progress Administration and its related programs not only provided crucial employment during tough times, but also enriched the American cultural landscape, leaving a legacy that's visible in public artwork and infrastructure across the country. In 1935, President Roosevelt introduced a new tax policy known as the Wealth Tax Act, also referred to as the Revenue Act of 1935. Its goal was to distribute wealth more evenly, imposing an astonishing 79% income tax on any income over $5 million. Back in the 1930s, having that kind of money was rare, meaning this high tax rate really applied to just one individual, none other than John D. Rockefeller. Despite its impressive intentions, the act wasn't really about generating revenue. It was expected to bring in just $250 million more for the government. According to Morgenthau, it was somewhat of a political maneuver, more for show than for substantive economic impact. Roosevelt himself hinted at a more strategic motive during a conversation with Raymond Moley, revealing he aimed to win over the supporters of Huey Long by playing a similar card. This move, however, did not sit well with the affluent, who began calling Roosevelt a traitor to his class and the act a soak-the-rich tax. Fast forward to 1936, and a new tax policy is unveiled, the undistributed profit tax. This time the objective was to raise funds, especially in light of the call to pay World War I veterans $2 billion under the Adjusted Compensation Payment Act. This legislation introduced a lasting concept that money retained within companies could be subject to taxation. The initial proposal aimed to encourage companies to distribute their earnings by making dividends paid to shareholders deductible for tax purposes. The aspiration was to replace all other corporate taxes with this one, hoping to enhance spending power among the general public. However, the final version of the law was less stark, with tax rates ranging from 7 to 27% and offering reprieves to smaller companies. By 1938, after encountering a barrage of criticism, the incentives regarding dividend payouts were revoked. In 1937, the U.S. government passed the Housing Act, also known as the Wagner-Steagall Act, aimed at improving living conditions for people with low incomes. This law allowed the federal government to provide financial subsidies to local public housing agencies in order to help them upgrade and maintain housing for less affluent families. This important piece of legislation led to the creation of the United States Housing Authority within the Department of the Interior, giving a more structured approach to managing housing subsidies. It built upon the earlier National Housing Act of 1934, which had established the Federal Housing Administration. Influential housing reformers, especially Catherine Bower Worcester, played a crucial role in shaping these laws. Worcester contributed significantly to the drafting of the 1937 Act, and even served as a director at the newly formed United States Housing Authority for 2 years. The law was championed by Alabama Representative Henry B. Steagall and New York Senator Robert F. Wagner, both Democrats, who faced initial opposition, but eventually saw the acceptance and longevity of the act, albeit in a modified form over the years. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt criticized the poor living conditions of the time, highlighting the need to eliminate substandard housing that not only lacked modern conveniences, but also jeopardized health and propagated disease for future generations. The act aimed to provide new housing, renew existing neighborhoods, reduce overcrowding, and create sustainable communities. However, to avoid claims of socialism and not to undercut private developers, it included a controversial requirement. For every new housing unit constructed, an old one had to be torn down. This, along with restrictions on residents' income and a cap on construction costs, shaped the program's execution. From 1939 to 1943, 160,000 new housing units were built, with an additional 10,000 by 1948. Despite its goals, the Housing Act of 1937 encountered problems. particularly in how it allowed local governments significant control over the deployment funds. This autonomy led to the perpetuation of segregationist housing policies by some local authorities and resulted in the neglect of numerous public housing projects. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.